Hey guys, welcome. We are so excited to be back with you, chatting with you again. Today, we're going to be talking all about communication, and that's both in large groups, that's one on one. And if you're someone who likes to talk like me, this is really exciting. And if you're someone who maybe is a little more shy, you may be a little bit more nervous. Yeah, my friend AC, Amanda, she's falls into that category, but you may be a little bit more nervous, but hopefully we can give you some tips today that will make you move forward with confidence.
Yeah.
So like I said, my name's Haley. I'm one of the FUGE coordinators, and I'm super excited to be with y'all today.
Yes. Hey, I'm Amanda, and I am one of the FUGE coordinators as well. And as Haley was saying, like speaking in front of people, not really my thing. But as you get older, you have to do it a whole lot more. So you learn to do things that you may not feel great at, but you pick up tips along the way. So that's what we hope today is just some really good tips for you to learn how to have some just good one-on-one conversation, as well as conversation if you are the speaker in front of an audience, or even just doing a Bible study in front of people. We want you to have these tools so that you're ready to go and honestly tell people about Jesus, because you got to have conversations to tell people about Jesus. And that's kind of what we're going to start talking about, is those just one-on-one, just a personal conversation. I know that a lot of things are online today, a lot of social media, and I feel like I could be alone in this, but I feel like that has kind of hurt the art of conversation. Haley, I don't know about you, but I feel like there's a lot more LOLs than actual laugh.
Totally agree. Or instead of even responding with words, we just put like three emojis, and that
Yes.
we feel like that's an adequate response.
Yes, and Haley knows this. When people abbreviate words,
Guilty.
it drives like adorbs and totes, and I'm like, "You're not a 14-year-old girl." So it kinda drives me crazy because I used to be a teacher, and I would read papers and grade them, and no one was spelling out words anymore, which I know is still kind of uncool, but when you're in conversation, sometimes you need to use the entire word or phrase.
Totally.
So we're going to talk just a few things, just those one-on-one conversations. But why is this even important today? Like, why do we need to know how to have one-on-one conversations? And I'm just going to throw out a few things out here that have spoken to me in the last few years that I've kind of studied. And the first one, and we know this as a church, community is important. And to build community, you have to have conversation. You can't build community without talking to someone. And my degree is actually in deaf education. As I said, I was a teacher, and I would have to sign everything I said. And I learned when I was going through college to learn this skill that the deaf have a culture. Even the IMB, the International Mission Board, has created their own culture for the deaf, so that when you learn to minister to deaf people, it's specifically for them in their culture, just like you would if you were going to Asia or Africa or someone else in the States. And so the reason the deaf have their own culture, they're all from America, what we talk to here, and you would think they would have an American culture, but it's different because of the language itself. So language plays a huge role in building community. Second, as I mentioned earlier, is sharing the gospel. We can do actions, we can do things and love people well, but eventually you've got to be able to share the gospel using your words. And so being able to have a gospel conversation, I actually know that I was on another one of these sessions, and we talked about how to share your testimony and how to share the gospel. And that comes through that natural way of learning to communicate with someone one-on-one. And then the last thing I want to talk about is just loving your neighbor well. That is also, I feel like, a lost art. We've started hanging out in our backyards and inside, and we used to all live on our front porches. And so you saw your neighbors, you interacted with your neighbors. And that's kind of a challenge I want to throw in now, that the art of conversation has been lost because we don't make ourselves available. So make yourself available to the people around you, specifically your real neighbor. Be out on your front yard, your front porches, take them something and start a conversation with them, and don't hide in your house at the end of the day, because I know that's really easy to do. And now that we've kind of talked through just a couple of reasons why we even do this, we're going to start with just some tips. Like I said, for some of us, this comes super natural. And then for some of us, it pushes us out of our comfort zone. So we're going to do a few tips on just these one on one conversations. So, first, when you're having a conversation with someone, don't multitask. Stay focused. And I know today our minds can go in 20 different directions, but we need to stay focused. Don't be doing other things. Put your phone down when you're having a conversation. I feel like I'm really bad at this. I don't know if you are, Haley, but I pick up my phone, I'm just sitting there and listening. I'm like, "Oh, I can listen." And I can kinda, but not fully listening, and may miss a few sentences here and there. So don't multitask. Second, don't be prideful in how you express your opinion or your feelings. As we know, specifically right now in the world, there are a lot of opinions and people are always right. And so when you go into a conversation one on one, you want to be open. You don't have to agree on everything, but you want to be open to learning something new. You want to come in with a humble attitude. Think about it. When Jesus was on earth, he knew everything. He was God, he knew it all, but he was still humble in his speech and in the way he interacted one on one with people. So make sure that when you're speaking with someone, you don't act like you know it all. Like your opinion isn't the only right opinion, that you can be open to sharing and learning from someone else. Haley, what are some more tips that you think of this one on one conversation?
Yes, I've got a couple. And as you're talking, I'm like, man, I'm so guilty of some of these. And
I
it's
know.
something that like you can even know this in your mind and you can have learned
Yes.
this a long time ago. Like, I know that I shouldn't be looking at this when I'm talking to someone, but you feel like it vibrates in your pocket or you just like your mind drifts. And so I am constantly having to remind myself of these things. So they're so good. And the next tip I have is use open-ended questions in conversation. Um, Instead of asking someone something that they could simply answer with a yes or a no, focus on questions that start more with who and what, where, when, why, how, and really invest and be intentional with the questions that you ask. That will keep the conversation going. And sometimes, I don't know if you've ever found yourself in a conversation where it feels like you're the only one keeping it going and the other person is just kind of like answering you and not asking questions. But that's okay. Just keep asking open ended questions. And eventually, you may hit something that sparks their interest, or they may become comfortable. Maybe they're nervous and they may become comfortable and be more willing to talk with you. But again, focus on those open ended questions versus the yes or no questions. The next one that I have is go with the flow. Um, have you ever been in a conversation and you realize that you're more focused on what am I going to say next? How am I going to respond to this instead of actually listening and taking in what they're saying to you before you come up with a response? Because if Amanda's starting a sentence and I'm already thinking about what I'm going to say next, then that's not going with the flow of conversation, because her sentence could be taking this conversation in a totally different direction than where I was headed. And so be listening to the person you're talking to so that you can go with the flow and make it natural.
Yes, for sure. And then if you don't know, like if you're in a conversation and you don't know the answer and you're trying to think of one, don't worry about it. Just say you don't know. Like it is okay to not have an answer. And you know what? When you don't know something, you can go learn it. Like go figure it out and you can always come back to that person. And then it leads into maybe another better conversation later. And then this is something that's really, I feel like common in the world right now. Don't equate your experience with someone else's, because sometimes people just need you to listen and not have all the answers and say, "Oh, I know how you feel," because it's not the same. People feel things differently. Your experience may be kind of the same, but it's never exactly the same. So just remember, it's not about you always in a conversation, that you need to have that empathy for someone else, and don't think about yourself. Like Haley was saying, don't make it all about you and what you're going to say, but just sit there and take it in and let their experience be theirs.
Totally. The next tip that I have is try to not repeat yourself. If they ask you to repeat yourself, of course you can go for it and reiterate what you were saying. But when we find ourselves constantly saying the same thing, even if we say it in different words in a conversation to get the same point across, it can come across as kind of condescending, like you don't think that they are listening or understanding. And it can also be really boring and people will check out on you. So say it one time. If they ask you to repeat, go ahead and repeat it. The one exception I would say is if you're talking to somebody making like a plan, or you're talking kind of business, or like we need to get this done, it is okay for both of you to go back at the end of the conversation and be like, okay, now what were our action steps? What do we need to do after this? But not in the midst of conversation. Don't keep saying it over and over again. And my next tip is stay out of the weeds. We say this in our office all the time. And what that means is when we get down in the weeds, we're just lost in details.
Mhm.
You're just talking about all kinds of details that are not necessary for the conversation at the time. If you're talking to someone, give them the general overview of what's happening. Any necessary details, feel free to share. But if they want more details, they'll ask you. And then at that point, you can feel free to move forward and share more details with them. But when you get so in the weeds and so logistical, and you're just giving them more information than they need, they're not going to be able to listen and absorb all of that.
For sure. And then this next one, this may be the most important one in today's society because I think we're kind of bad at it, but just listen. Just as we're saying, kind of all these tips kind of go together and it comes down to us just listening and being able to let someone else speak to us. There's a quote that says, if your mouth is opening, then you're not learning. So you're not taking anything in and you're not hearing someone else's opinion. And a lot of times in miscommunication, it's because people weren't listening. And miscommunication leads to a lot of conflict and people tearing each other down and people getting feelings hurt. So I feel like one of the best things you can do in a one-on-one conversation is really listen and take in what's going on and not trying to always be the talker. We tend to want to talk the whole time because we want to control it. A lot of I feel like, especially today, I know I'm saying this a lot, but it just feels like we want to control things because when the world feels out of control, we want to control every little aspect that we can. And when we're in a conversation, if we're talking more, we're controlling it. We don't have to worry about what someone's about to ask us or what someone's about to say or how am I going to respond. So just take the time to listen and really hear people and their stories. We're created to share stories and to hear stories. And honestly, that's a part of sharing the gospel is hearing someone's story about where they are in life and where Jesus can meet them there. And then our last tip on this one-on-one conversation is just to be brief. Haley and I both talk about it. We are bullet point people. Like our emails are quick and short.
Oh,
We're
yeah.
quick to the point. And it's so people don't lose interest. We just don't have a lot of time these days and we want to get through things and we want to be efficient. So don't feel like you have to fill space if there's nothing quality there to say. Make sure you're just being brief, being to the point so that conversation's enjoyable for everyone.
That's great. So at this time, we are going to transition into talking less about the one-on-one conversation. There may still be a couple tips you could take into one-on-one conversations, but our main focus for the second half of this is going to be presenting and professionalism, specifically thinking about talking in front of a crowd or a group. And that may be a small crowd. That may be 5 people at your church or something, or it could be a large crowd if eventually you're speaking in front of your whole church or on some kind of other platform. So we want to give you some tips. The first tips that I give you are going to be super practical, super tangible, and they're just professionalism. We share these with our summer staff all the way up to our directors every single year. And it's not because we think you guys don't know this stuff. It's just helpful to have a little reminder for all of us. So my first couple, the first one, let's just hygiene, guys. Let's just jump right in there. We've got to be hygienic. And what I mean by that is like you got to shower and make that a regular thing in your life. Deodorant, great idea. Brush your teeth morning and nighttime, and sometimes in between if you eat something crazy. We need to shave. I know it feels silly to be talking about this, but it's so true. And
Yeah.
guys, especially Brad Barnett is over all of Lifeway Students events. He's big on this about the beard, like the neck beard, neared, as we call it so lovingly. And then on the back of the neck, he always calls that cleaning the kitchen. So you got to clean the kitchen, make sure everything's as it needs to be. Got to get haircuts. We laugh because so many times during the summer, our staff will show up just looking like wide-eyed, sweet, little young things. And then by the end of the summer, they look like the cast of Survivor because they haven't gotten haircuts and they haven't been shaving. And so you got to focus on getting haircuts and just looking like you need to.
You got to thrive, not just survive.
Yes. And it's tough sometimes, but you just got to fit it in. You got to fit it in. My next thing is always be within dress code. And you may not always be working or speaking at something that even has a dress code or even just attending something with a dress code. But it will say so much about your maturity and your professionalism if you are living as if you have a dress code all the time. And just representation of Christ. And so making sure that things that need to be covered are covered and that things fit and you don't have any kind of like offensive or crazy graphics on your shirt. And so just living within that is always a good rule of thumb. The next one, wear clothes that fit. And so some people will get clothes that are really, really small, both guys and girls. They're a little tight. You put your arms up and it's like, oh, there's the belly. And then some people, it's a big thing right now to get shirts that are really, really big. And then sometimes it looks like if you're wearing a big shirt, it looks like you're not wearing shorts. So just get clothes that fit you and it'll be all gravy. And make sure that those clothes that fit you are not covered in lint or super wrinkled. And guys, I want to tell you a secret. Amanda and I are not the people who are going to iron our clothes every day, but we are going to have a lint roller and a bottle of wrinkle release spray. Or you
That
throw that
wrinkle
junk in
release
the dryer.
spray, it saves
Oh,
your life. It's the best thing ever.
I hope whoever came up with wrinkle release spray is rich because they deserve it.
Yeah. I've made them rich if they are.
Yes, me too. You can also other quick tips that you could do: throw it in the dryer just for a couple minutes. It'll get a lot of the wrinkles out. Or if you're taking a hot shower, hang it up in the bathroom, and the steam will get the wrinkles out. So those are for free. Those extra tips. And wear a watch, especially if you're talking in front of a group. You don't want to be the reason that programming runs behind, or that things run over. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. And then always carry yourself with confidence. Smiling, looking people in the eye, things like that. Having your shoulders back. Confidence goes so far in making you come across as professional and mature. And then the last thing, especially when you're addressing a group of adults. So like our Bible study leaders, these next couple things, they'd be fine and they'd be fun. But when I'm standing up talking to a group of adults, I probably wouldn't do these things. You want to look like the adult in the room, even if you are just 16, 17, 18. You want to come across as someone who adults want to listen to and will trust with the information that you're communicating to them. Also, no pigtails. I love some little braided pigtails in the summer. It's so cute. But also take off hats, sparkly headbands, any kind of headbands. I just focus on the sparkly ones. Whistles, fanny packs, all that. Just look like the adult in the room and think about that as you're talking to them. And Amanda's going to hit us now with some general tips when you're standing up talking to adults.
Yeah, these are just some overall general things, and we're going to kind of fly through these because it's a lot, but they're things that we don't really need to explain that I think you'll kind of get along the way. But the first one is stand when addressing a room and then move around from side to side. Don't be a robot. Don't stand stiff. Interact with the crowd and the audience and feel free to move, but move with purpose. And then before you start, know your content. Make sure that you're familiar with what you want to say. Don't just do it by the seat of your pants, like you want to know what you want to communicate, because if you know it, the better you know it, the more natural it will come. It won't look like you're just sitting there reading the whole time. You don't have to have as many notes. You're just there looking comfortable, and it makes you look confident too if you know your material. And the next one kind of goes along with this: practice. To know that material, you've got to spend time at home practicing. And that can be in front of a mirror. It can be in front of friends. These days, you can videotape it and send it to someone and let them even critique you. But just make sure you practice, and that the first time you run through something, it's not when you're actually executing it. It's not in front of that audience that you're preparing it for. Next, feel free to use note cards. Like, it is okay if you need some reminders, especially if you're up there for a long time or there's some very important things that you cannot miss that they need to know. Have some note cards. Just make sure that they look professional, that you've written only what you need to know to kind of get you through, and don't have them up here in front of your face reading. Make sure they're kind of down here so you can talk through them, and that you just kind of need to glance every now and then. And then replace fidgeting, like just kind of maybe a nervous thing you do, or kind of you look like you're shaking, because trust me, I've stood up in front of the audience and I get a little nervous. Haley has been there many a times, but I have to fake it till I make it. And so you just have to make your motions a little more confident. If you're going to use hand motions, it's fine, but you've got to be confident when you're speaking, and they're going to trust your content more. The more you look like you have it together up there, they're going to trust what you have to say. And that kind of goes with just any body language. Make eye contact. If you have people in the audience, look at the different people in the audience. Don't just stand there and pick one place. Sometimes people will tell you that, but it looks fake, I think, Haley. Like when you're just kind of focused on one spot and you're automatically speaking, people know when you look at them. Like I know when a pastor's looking at me, and sometimes it feels like he's talking to me.
Yeah.
And then if you know people in the audience, feel free to call them by name. If it's a setting where it's not a huge crowd, but like a Bible study or things like that, use people's names. It makes them feel like they're a part of it. They're going to track along with you a little bit more, and it makes the room feel more comfortable overall. It just brings more of a personal connection. Also, slow down. If you need to have some pauses in there, you need to grab a drink of water, whatever it is, you don't have to go super fast because sometimes when you're nervous, I do this a lot, you just start speaking really fast because you want to get through it and get to the end. But that's not helping your communication to the people you're speaking with. It's not giving them what they need. So it's okay to go slow. Don't feel like you're in a race. You're not in it to be the first one finished. You want to get whatever message you need to conveyed to the audience well. Also, and you've probably heard me do this a few times while we're doing this right now, but try to leave out those filler words that and like. They come super natural. We all do it. But at least try to make them as few as possible. Don't be someone who's like counting each time you say like and and maybe the first time you have something prepared and you share it, get a person who you're sharing it with to actually mark ums and likes. I've had people do this for me, and it really is an eye opener at the end of it when you're like, you said like 50 times, so you may want to dial it back just a bit. It really will help the way you speak in front of people. And again, it just sounds, hate to say it this way, but it sounds more intelligent, and people will follow along with you better when they're not distracted by little cues like that. And keep your eye on the clock. I know Haley kind of mentioned this earlier about having a watch. If you don't have a watch, make sure you know where a clock in the room is so you're staying on time, because we talked about earlier, you want to be brief. You want to be very efficient with your time, because you know when that preacher is late on Sunday morning, everybody's paying attention to the clock and ready for lunch, and they're not paying attention to what the pastor has to say. Everybody's like, where are you going to lunch? They're starting to text each other. You don't want that to happen when you're speaking to people. You want to keep them engaged. And then just remember that it can be a two-way conversation, even in a big room. You can ask questions, keep them engaged. Don't leave them hanging. Watch the room well. And if there's something you're talking about and you want to get some interaction with them, it's okay to ask a question and get some feedback. Just manage the room well and read the eyes of the people. Again, you're going to be looking at the people. So manage that well, and bring them into the conversation. Whenever you bring someone in and they feel like they're being heard and they're a part of it, they're going to engage more and for longer. And then Haley, if you'll share too, Haley, I'll just say this. Haley is a better public speaker than I am. It is definitely her gifting. And so I've
Now,
had
let me
to
say
learn.
this. You wouldn't know that because she comes across so confidently. We may feel differently on the inside when we speak in front of a group, but you would not know that she is uncomfortable because she's perfected it.
Thanks, Haley. But it's because of some of these, honestly, I'm not saying that just because this is what we're talking about, but it's because of some of these tips that I've had to learn along the way. And I think just, Haley, for you, it comes a little more natural. You've done it more. It's more of who you are and your personality. And so I know I've seen it in Haley, like she can manage a room very easily because of a lot of these things we're talking about. And we want to make sure it's not just general tips either, that we're communicating and there's purpose. So Haley's going to talk a little bit about that now.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing, I have always been just naturally really comfortable in front of crowds and really comfortable in front of cameras. That's not been something that intimidates me. I just don't really God has allowed me to not really get nervous in those situations. And for that, I'm very thankful. However, I need these tips just as bad as anyone, because just because you're comfortable doesn't mean you're good at it. And so you have to learn to be more professional. You have to learn to be smooth and to make it feel natural. And so just know, like, even if you're someone who you're like, I just don't get embarrassed. I love crowds. This is great. Like, still take these to heart because they can still be super helpful. And I am definitely still learning on my communication journey and always will be. So the next few general tips, and I hope that we've modeled some of these well for you today. And if you think back on earlier in our session, you may notice that we've tried to incorporate this. So every time that you are speaking to a group, begin by answering two questions. Why are we here? And why does this matter? And we did that for you today. And so it could just kind of gives you a little roadmap of like, okay, where are we going? And why do I need to tune in and listen to this? Why is this valuable to me? And it just helps people want to stay on track and want to be engaged with you. And then if you're giving any kind of announcements or logistics, think at FUGE, the director stands up and they're announcing lunch rotations, or site directors talking about send off, things like that. Those are all announcements and logistics. And so when you are doing that, only tell people what they need to know at the time. Because when I was a camp director, if I was seeing my Bible study leaders and giving them important announcements at like 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm not going to go ahead and talk about what's happening at nightlife that night, because that is so far away for them. They can't, their minds can't even get there yet. And so I'm going to think about, okay, I'm going to see them at 7, and then I'm going to see them again around lunchtime. And I'm going to think about, what do I need to tell them at each chunk of the day that will be helpful to them, the closest to when it's going to matter for them. So just be thinking about that. And a couple others here we have, help to make things that are complex
Mhm.
simple, clear, and concise. Especially think, and I'm just using FUGE examples because we all have that context, I think, in common. Think about how complicated a camp schedule can be to a first time attendee or a first time church, especially if you're at a combo camp and we've got centrifuge, infuge with your church. We're all running all these different directions. And so trying to break that down for people in bite-sized chunks that make sense for them. And when you give people a handout, any kind of handout, yes, they can read. Yes, they are intelligent and fully capable. However, it's just helpful for them to keep listening to what you're saying. If you say, hey guys, I'm about to give you this sheet. This is what it is. And we'll talk about it in just a minute, so that they just nod along. They can put it to the side and they don't feel the need to go ahead and start reading and tuning out of what you're talking about. So just mention what it is. And also focus on your transitional statements and craft smooth one liners. This doesn't have to be anything elaborate or super fancy. It can just be kind of what we've done in this. At this time, Haley's going to talk about this, and now Amanda's going to share this. And that's just helps your listeners feel like they know where you're headed, and it's not a big abrupt shift in the energy of the room. The next one, love this one. A little bit of humor is good for keeping your audience engaged, and
Yes.
it makes it more fun for you too. And however, your content is most important. So I'm sure that you've had maybe teachers or something along the lines who don't use any humor, and it's just like, here is information for you and your brain. And then I don't know if you've ever seen someone standing up and speaking that is just like, are you a stand-up comedian, or like, what are we doing? And so you want to find that sweet spot in the middle where it's still funny and it's engaging, keeps people awake and alert, but at the same time, they're totally grasping onto the content that you're trying to communicate. And then we talked about not using abbreviations, and also not using like the letter abbreviations or insider lingo. So at FUGE, we have a ton of insider lingo. And I always try to think, how would this come across to a first time church or a first time student or adult? And so instead of saying, oh yeah, our AD, PD, VP, RD, BSFL, like all of these things, our assistant director, our program director, our video producer, even things like closing cell. I'm going to say closing celebration, just because that, even just cutting it off like that, that's a little bit of inside lingo, and just helping them out, especially the first few times that you say it. And let your personality come through. This is one of the most endearing things when you're sharing with a group, is being yourself, letting your personality and your humor and all that come through in the way when you're talking to a group. It just shows them who you are, and it makes them want to listen to you and what you have to say. When appropriate, feel free to include short personal stories if they add to what you're trying to say. Amanda and I have thrown in a few of those today. Again, make them brief, make them really, really quick little personal stories, but it can make it more personal, and it can kind of change the temperature of the room a little bit, from like less like boom, boom, boom information to, okay, this is personal and tuning in. Your pastor probably does this really well. So pay attention listening to your youth pastor and your pastor, because I'm sure that they include these kind of things. And most of all, passion and authenticity is so much more powerful than perfection. We know we have thrown a ton of information at you today. Feel free to go back and rewatch or go back and take some notes, things like that. But just don't get so caught up in like checking the boxes. You'll get more natural as you continue to practice and as you get older. However, just remember, be yourself, be authentic, and be passionate about what you're talking about. Because that'll go a lot more further, or that'll go a lot further than saying everything absolutely perfectly. So, all right, guys, thank you so much. Amanda and I have had fun with you today. It's,
Thanks. We've
yes,
loved it. We hope you got something good from it because
yes,
this really has helped both of us along the way to do things in our career and just personal lives as well.
it totally has. So we hope that there's something here that you can grow from. And there were things even listening to this that I was like, oh, I need to make a note of that, and I need to do better at that. And so,
I noted every time I said like. I was like, oh no.
but thank you guys so much. Hope you have a great time discussing with each other, and we'll see you guys later.
Yeah.